Let's go ahead and start. My name is Deborah Fallows. I also go by Deb. I'm a writer and a journalist, and I live in Washington, D.C. First, I'd like to thank Rural Women Everywhere for having us as part of their project and their programming conference today. We can all see from the last 2 days that they've done a tremendous amount of hard work in the background and has made it all go smoothly in the foreground. We'd like to invite all of you to participate today. We'll go through our program first after you've heard from all of the panelists. And if you want to raise your hand, Ben, who's in the background here, will notice you. Or if you want to send questions into the chat room, he'll monitor those too, and we can call on you a little bit later in the program. So I think we may as well just get started, and anybody who comes later can kind of catch up with us. I've been a follower of rural strategies and Daily Yonder and the Rural Assembly, and a fan of Whitney Coe's for a long time, for several years. So I'm really happy to be here as moderator of this panel here. On behalf of our town's Civic Foundation, which is a nonprofit that my husband, Jim Fallows, and I started about 6 months ago. A little backstory to why I'm here and why our panel is here. Jim and I began our town's adventure about 8 years ago. We had been living in China as journalists and reporters and had spent most of our time out of the major cities into the rural areas, into towns all around the country, by horseback, by train, by bus, by foot, you name it. And we always found that the most interesting stories we heard and our real insights into the country of China was by being in the small towns around the country. That's where we felt the heart and soul of the country. So when we returned to the US, just about 2009, when the recession was going into somewhat of a wane after a wax, we decided that we wanted to get back in touch with our own country the same way we had done in China, which was by going out to the small towns around the country to see what was going on. In particular, we wanted to get an idea of what had happened in towns where there had been some kind of stress during the recession. Maybe the mill closed, or the factory or the mine closed, or maybe there had been a lot of people who were moving out of town, or maybe there had been a lot of people moving into town. So to start off that project, Jim put a post on his blog at The Atlantic, said, here's what we're doing, and invited people to write into us and say, here's why you should come to our town. So we were really surprised that within a week, we got about 1,000 responses from people, not just come to my town, but here is the story of my town, and here is why you should come here. So that launched about the next 5 years of travel. We had a small plane that we hopped around the country in, which was great because it was a wonderful way to get around. We traveled to more than 50 cities, 100,000 miles, and we blogged our way around. We wrote things just about every day when we went from place to place. Eventually, that turned into a book called Our Towns, which was published in 2018. And that turned into an HBO documentary, which was also called Our Towns, which was released last April. And now we've launched a nonprofit, guess what? The name is Our Towns, to further the work that we had done and to try to spread the message. What we learned during all of these travels is a message of the tremendous breadth and strength of community-driven renewal and revival in small town America. We've heard, of course, and we all acknowledge the stories of the national divisions and the trouble and the despair around the country, but this is another story to tell. This is an underreported story about the creativity and determination town by town that is invigorating the country from the ground up. So our mission with the foundation now going forward is to amplify those stories, to connect the people telling those stories and to give them their own voices, and to really strengthen the whole message of renewal in the country as a kind of antidote to the also true, but we've heard a lot about it already, divisions and fraught situations around the country. So I am 100% delighted to have a wonderful panel of women and Ben Spigen, a man who's joining us today, who are important in taking on these roles as leaders in their community. Jim and I had the pleasure of meeting our three panelists plus Ben, our four panelists during our travels. And I'd like to just introduce them real briefly and then go one by one to their stories. They have been working very hard in very different ways to address the problems and craft different solutions and finally strengthen the towns where they're living. We have Joanna Tabit, who is a judge from Charleston, West Virginia. Joanna, can you just give us a wave there? There she is. Tracy Tap, who is a community organizer from Ajo, Arizona in the Southwest. Tracy, hi. And Laura Whalen, who is from Eastport, Maine, a journalist there. We also have Ben Spigen, who you will see on this panel. Ben has the distinction of, I think, being the only man on a panel at the Rural Women's Assembly, Rural Women Everywhere. So we are really excited to have him here. Jim and I have known Ben for a very long time, since we did reporting in Erie, Pennsylvania. He is an accomplished journalist and writer and editor and radio talk host and podcaster and a VIP of a think tank in Erie, Pennsylvania. And we are very welcoming to him today for his perspectives and his male perspective and admiring of his bravery to show up to this women's conference. So I would like to start right in by introducing our panelists a little more in depth one by one, and then asking them to tell you about their hometowns and what they do there and how their work fits into their town and what kind of impact their work is having in the town. First, we have Judge Joanna Tabit. Joanna is a judge in numerous specialty courts in Charleston, West Virginia. And among other things, she oversees the opioid litigation there. We met Joanna in her juvenile drug court in Charleston during a taping of the HBO documentary where she is a rock star. Joanna really kindly invited us to go into the back room and talk to her whole staff who minds the drug court, and to sit in the courtroom to witness some of the proceedings with the youth and their families as she would talk to them and they would go through their cases and catch up with them and see what was going on. It was a stunning experience, and we witnessed firsthand her combination of being completely compassionate and yet addressing the young people there with a very iron hand. They knew she was serious. There's one comment that Joanna made that particularly stands out with me, and I remember, was when one young man was before her in the courtroom, and it was clear that he had had his ups and downs and had been around for a while. And Joanna looked at him really seriously and said, "We are not giving up on you. You can't give up on yourself," which kind of sums up her strength and power as a judge. So Joanna, I'd like to turn it over to you to tell us about your town, what you do, and the kind of important role it plays in Charleston, West Virginia.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's great to be here. And thank you for that very gracious introduction. I'm blushing, and given my heritage and complexion, that is no small task. So thank you. And first, let me tell you a little bit about my town, and I'll tell you a little bit about my work as well. I am a lifelong West Virginian, and I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. That's my town, and that's the town that Jim and Deb came to visit. Charleston is the capital city, and on a day like today, it's 70 degrees right now. It was crisp and cool on a fall morning. We've got a beautiful, sunny, clear October sky. West Virginia, Charleston particularly, is everything you think about when you think of West Virginia. It's wild, it's wonderful, and I might be biased in favor of it, but I think it's almost heaven too. I will tell you though that when I grew up here, and I've lived here all my life, but years ago, when I was younger, it was a city of about 80,000 people. And it was a vibrant community driven primarily by the chemical industry, which was all around us, and also by thriving coal mining industry as well. And as you can imagine, those have all left. So many of the mines are closing, and those chemical plants have closed as well. And with that, a lot of very good paying jobs that really powered the valley as well. We in Charleston are struggling with a lot of the issues that small cities struggle in, big and small cities struggle with throughout the country. We've got a depressed economy. We deal with homelessness and crime, but we are really, really devastated by the drug crisis, particularly the opioid crisis. And I really do think that so much of it is related to a sense of hopelessness, frankly, that people feel here in West Virginia due to the lack of opportunity with respect to the economy and the like. As Deb mentioned, I'm a circuit judge here in Charleston and in Kanawha County. I'm one of 7 in the county. We're the biggest county in West Virginia, and we have busy dockets. My path has been a kind of an interesting journey to this position. Before I came here, I did a lot of different things and was a practicing lawyer for about 28 years and have been a circuit judge for 7. But I was what people call a tall building lawyer, and I defended employers, physicians, all kinds of folks that have been sued for various things. I really was a generalist. I didn't have much of a specialty, but that's what I call myself, kind of a tall building lawyer. But I always wanted to be a judge. When I first got out of school, I worked for a judge, and that kind of set me on my path. I had wonderful mentors throughout my career, men and women, and I always felt like this had been my life's calling. It took me a while to get here, but I got here. And it may be cliche, but I'll say that the reason that I wanted to become a judge was to help people, and particularly those people in my home state. But I will tell you that if I thought that the courthouse that I work in was built for the work that my clients and I used to do, I was very wrong. We are general jurisdiction judges here in West Virginia, and that just means we do everything. We do the civil cases, which are about money. We do the criminal cases. We do divorces. We do child abuse, neglect, juvenile cases, all of those. But I can unequivocally tell you that 75% of the work that we do involves children, youth, and their families. And it is, without a doubt, the most important work that we do, because I believe that family is really the foundation for our society. And as Deb mentioned, maybe my favorite part of my job is the fact that I'm the presiding judge over our juvenile drug court here in Kanawha County. And what drug court is it's a cooperative effort of the judicial officers like myself, social service workers, law enforcement, mental health, and education systems in the state. And what we are working to do is to divert youth who have been involved in juvenile justice for whatever reason. It could be truancy, it could be being incorrigible, just not behaving, but they could also be delinquent and be committing crimes that would be misdemeanors and felonies if they were an adult. And what our program does is we try to divert these folks, nonviolent juvenile offenders, from that traditional juvenile justice process. And we try to get them involved in intensive, individualized treatment because they have exhibited alcohol and or substance abuse problems. And of course, the goal is to get them clean, to get them educated, and to reduce their further involvement in the court process. And to do this by keeping them at home with their families and keeping them in the communities, as opposed to having to put them in the facilities or what is a detention center, which is like a kiddie jail. And we find that in adult drug courts will tell you the same thing. If you can keep folks within the community and get them there, the results are much more positive. And that's in a nutshell what we do. And I hope that what we're doing, and I think that what we're doing is impactful. We celebrate our successes when the kids graduate from our program, and it's not an easy program. It's about 8 months, and it requires significant family involvement because, it does take a village. And we do counseling for the families, counseling for the participants, the youth participants, and they do group counseling as well. And our goal is to give them the tools they need to stay drug-free and to teach them coping mechanisms and strategies to stay that way, and to get them educated and get them healthy so that they can become healthy and productive members of society and have a successful future that they're looking at. And, I'm not naive, and I don't want you to think we're always successful and everybody in our drug court graduates, because unfortunately they don't. But that's okay, because still, when we can touch them, even if they're not able to graduate our program, we believe that we're helping them, because we're going to get them to that next step, and we're going to get them the treatment that they need and the services that they need.
Thank you, Joanna. And your story just now, you're telling about this, really reminds me of something that we learned on our travels around the country. Whenever we went into schools or went to the YMCA or to various kinds of youth groups where people were working with and helping young people, is how much work it takes by so many people to devote themselves to the life of one child or one young person. It's an extremely labor-intensive operation, and there doesn't seem to be a way to scale it with more efficiency, because we're all human beings and they're human beings and need the kind of personal attention that we saw you giving them in the drug court. So thank you for that. Okay, now we'll travel up to down east in Maine to talk with Laura Whalen. Down east Maine is always geographically confusing because it's way up there, but it's actually called down there. So Eastport, Maine is about as far as you can get before you hit Canada. Laura is an assistant editor and publisher of the Quoddy Tides, and I have a show and tell here. Here it is, the latest edition of the Quoddy Tides, which is a very chubby, as you can see, newspaper of Laura, and it comes out every 2 weeks. She publishes and writes, sometimes it looks like the entire paper, with her husband, Ed French, and has a very interesting family story there. Ed's family was really important founders of the Eastport community, and that his mother started this newspaper and his father started the health center, was the town doctor. And now Laura has joined that family and is indispensable in the newspaper and in the rest of Eastport itself. She writes about everything from in the paper, from the city council meetings, which we went to some of, to the school news, to the shipping activity in the Bay of Fundy that it goes up and down and in and out every day, to book reviews and op-eds and editorials and obituaries and births. And if that's not enough, like most people in Eastport, Laura wears several hats. She's been very active in the historic preservation in town, which is critical along the main street. They've had some bad luck times in Eastport when 1876 or something like that, the whole main street burned down and had to be rebuilt. And now it's been under serious renovation from, again, the French family. Laura's brother-in-law is a founding person of this and very active in the in a museum there. Her work is not only in journalism and in historic preservation, but also in the arts. And it's really, she is an example of how all of these efforts, the journalism, the historic preservation, the active community of arts, are critical to sustaining the foundation of democracy in her town and in building the culture in her town. So Laura, can you tell us a little bit about the wonderful Eastport and all of what you do there, especially the journalism?
Oh, thank you, Deb. And thank you, Rural Women's Assembly. This is so fun to be here. I'm so looking forward to learning from everybody. So as Deb said, I'm the assistant editor and publisher at the Quoddy Tides. Eastport is a causeway connected island right up next to the Canadian border, and we're on Passamaquoddy Bay. Passamaquoddy Bay is, of course, named for the Passamaquoddy. They are the indigenous communities, part of the Wabanaki Confederacy. All these lands were their homelands. So we cover what we consider three nations. We cover Washington County, Maine. We cover the Passamaquoddy tribe, and we cover parts of Charlotte County, New Brunswick. And the reason for that is because Mrs. French, when she founded the newspaper, she saw a gap that needed to be filled. The Eastport Sentinel had been out of business for many years. Eastport was a major shipping community. All of them around the bay were connected by boats, and many families were interconnected across the bay as well. So having that community voice as a newspaper to represent all these people with shared history was her vision for the newspaper. And it's something that Edward took on when she became ill and grew it. And then I came into the picture in the mid 2000s and started growing it too. And now we have a staff of 6 and about 20 freelancers that we work with. So with my hat on as the assistant editor and publisher, I spend a lot of time writing articles, of course, as Deb outlined, copy editing. You could find me painting the storm windows. Right about now, I should be doing that. Driving the van in the summer to deliver summer guides all up and down the coast. You know, it's a very typical rural community business in that we jump in and do whatever needs to be done. But my pride and joy, of course, working for the newspaper is about listening to people's stories. And that is something that is the greatest pleasure. And when you're in the grocery store, this, again, so many people listening into this, they understand this. You go to the grocery store, you go to the post office, you walk down the street, you go to an art center event, someone comes up to you and they say, I have a concern, or did you hear? Or, gosh, you know, my grandmother's 100 and she's going to have a birthday party. Can you cover it? So it's just full of these wonderful interactions. And even when they're tragic, that trust that people give to us as the newspaper has been hard won, because that's not an easy thing for someone to do when they're vulnerable, to come up to you and give you something that is precious to them, whether it's a tragedy or a joy. So that is the joy of my work, is having that trust of our community. Our community is not just Eastport. Eastport's my love, it's where I live, but we really encompass a wide area with many differences. Eastport, I think, is particularly special. It is very beautiful with this island environment, but it also, as Deb mentioned, has this cross-cultural blend of really old and vigorous working waterfront, which not only is fishermen, but we also have a very deep water port. So we have freighters coming in with tugs helping them come in. We also have a very vibrant arts community, which started over 100 years ago because of the beauty, and because at the time the port was thriving. We would have people coming up from Boston to rusticate over the summer, and they were interested in the arts community. But then in the 70s, we had a significant back to the land hippie sort of movement of people moving into town. And they brought a whole lot of life and arts to the community, and are still a very big presence here. So those are the elements that have brought Eastport to the present, and through some very hard times, much like what Joanna was talking about. Our shipbuilding industry, our sardine industry, our logging industry, those have all almost completely.
Broadband can be a bit challenging.
I think we've got Laura back. Laura, we lost you there for a second. You were talking about the challenging times, and we were hearing about the impact on the sardine industry, and we lost you right there while you had us on the line. Could you pick up there?
Sure, thank you. So sardine industries, logging, most of our industries have gone away, and we too have been hit very hard by the opiate addiction problems. But again, one of the beautiful things that I find about rural communities is how each person when they find that they are of value to their community, they step forward and they work hard for it. That is what brings us, right smack into the present, and will bring us into the future as well. The way that people will knit together in rural communities and work for something they believe passionately in. And my job as a newspaper person is to make sure that those stories are captured, and for their neighbors to read and be inspired and touched by. So that I hope that helps people understand our little corner of the world here in Eastport.
Thank you, Laura. And one word that you brought up that really sits with me a lot deeply is the word trust. And I think that, one of the great services you provide in your town with the newspaper is true information getting out there to people so that they don't need to rely on gossip. I mean, we all listen to gossip and we all pass along gossip, but this is a foundation for truth and information in the town that you provide, which I think builds an underlay of trust. And that's at least part of the reason that people work with each other and for each other in small towns, and certainly in Eastport. So thank you. Now we'll go to the opposite end of the country, to Ajo, Arizona, which is in the Southwest, in the Sonoran Desert, Southwest Arizona. Jim and I have been there many times during our travels, and we often thought that Eastport, Maine and Ajo, Arizona were like two children separated at birth. They're both very small towns with very strong cultures and beautiful towns, but extremely different because of the conditions they were raised in or grew up in. So Tracy is not originally from Ajo, Arizona. She has been all over the country as an academic, teaching philosophy at Bryn Mawr, as a community educator and strategist and visionary for nonprofits in Philadelphia, as a trainer of leaders in NGOs and government and finance in Washington, DC. Somehow this all came together when she ended up in Ajo, Arizona, and fell in love with the place. Ajo is a former copper mining town. For a good 80 years, that was the sustenance and strength of the town. And it is a beautiful town near the Mexican border, Southwest Arizona. Tracy was fundamental in building what is called the International Sonoran Desert Alliance, International Sonoran Desert Alliance. And it is an alliance of three nations of people: the Mexicans, the Tohono O'odham tribe living there, and the Anglo populations, all of whom worked on the mine and who have been around in Ajo and the vicinity for a very long time. So the Desert Alliance was formed, as Tracy will tell us more, to support the culture and the economy and the environment, and bring the town back after the mine closed and the source of the economy disappeared. We first met in 2015 or so, maybe 2014, and Jim and I have been back there half a dozen times at least. What impresses us in Ajo is the same kind of thing as in Eastport, where everybody feels they need to be part of this community, of driving its economic and cultural health. One curious trait about Ajo is that everybody thinks they're an artist. So many people said, I came here because of the light. The light is beautiful, and that's why I'm an artist. We heard it. Tracy is also an artist, besides all the things I've told you about. And Jim and I would often laugh that after being there a few times, we thought, we don't dare come back until we pick up some kind of artistry and can call ourselves artists, because we're not going to be allowed back into this town, which we keep wanting to go to. So I give you Tracy Tap to tell us her story of how she got there, what she's been doing, and Ajo itself.
Wow, thank you. I don't know how to follow on that. Yes, to all of the things you said. I want to step back and unless you've been to Ajo already, like Deb, and I think maybe one or two people on this call have been, it mostly won't make sense. And so I'd like you to just start out by imagining that you're hanging out in Tucson or Phoenix, and either of those cities is 2 to 2.5 hours away from Ajo. And so, unless you have no money, you're going to be driving. If you have only a little bit of money, you'll be riding the bus. Either way, you're going to be spending that couple of hours driving. You know, at first there'll be some outbuildings and some farm country and so forth, but you'll go into the Sonoran Desert Monument. The landscape will turn, you know, quickly to just a huge variety of cactus and desert trees and nothing else except some cliffs and some mesas here and there. And gradually the landscape opens up and you're just like blown away, because a desert is supposed to be sandy, you know, and not have much life in it. But this desert, because it gets rain twice a year, this desert is green. And it has an incredible number of plants and trees and really weird stuff. So if you're coming from somewhere else, what's happening is that your imagination is starting to wake up, because you haven't seen things that shape, and everything, of course, has spikes on it to prevent it from being eaten by whatever wants to eat it. And, you know, it's a really strange and different landscape. So that's what's happening as you kind of come on one or the other of the highways toward Ajo, either across the Tohono Nation from Tucson, if you're coming that way, or down from Phoenix down Highway 85. And so in 2 to 2.5 hours, you come into town, and it looks, especially from the north, it looks pretty shabby. And you know, you will have done a little reading probably and know that it's a town where the mine closed back in 85, and that closing devastated the economy. It just slammed it into the ground, and most of the people living here left. So it had been 9,000 some people, and it reduced down to 2,000. So, you know, what the heck is going on? But it doesn't look as bad now. And so you keep, you know, driving down the highway into town past, you know, some of the gas stations and Mexican insurance places, sales places. And then suddenly you are in the middle of this Hispanic style town plaza. It's stunning. It's red tile roofed and gabled, arched, you know, 2.5 acre plaza surrounded by Spanish Revival style buildings on the one side, and that's looking to the east. And looking to the west, you see two sort of magnificent white historic churches, one Catholic, one Protestant. And you look between them at the most significant building in town, which was the old Curley School. And all of this was built in like 1916 to 1918. And to give you the scope of it. So, you know, like I said, you've been driving through all this like crazy desert stuff, and then you come into a pretty rundown looking town, and then boom, you're in the middle of this historic town center that really any other city in Arizona would kill to have, our little tiny town center. The scope of it is, it's actually, I don't know, about a 25 acre town center. And because Ajo is unincorporated, when it was deteriorating, as it was when I came to town, first in 1992 and then to live year round in 2000, you know, you could see the buildings start to fall apart. This magnificent Curley School building, which was the public school, the windows were starting to fall out. And I don't think town people realized it, but if you knew anything about buildings, you could see that this one was going to head for the wrecking ball before too long. And it was so huge that nobody knew what to do with it. So the scope of it is, so because there was no incorporated town to try to do something about these buildings, it fell to the work of a nonprofit. And that was the International Sonoran Desert Alliance. Like Deb said, it's, where Ajo is located is at the intersection of three nations. It's just north of the US-Mexico border. All of the land between Ajo and Tucson is the Tohono Nation. And then the land in Ajo itself really had belonged to another group, the Hiachet Atam, who claimed their rights through the Tohono Atam. And so, three cultures abound in the town. It's the intersection of those nations. There used to be really free commerce across all of those boundaries. And here you have the town disintegrating because the mine closed back in 1985 and everybody lost their jobs. And it was a company town, so they lost their homes too if they worked in the mine. And then other people like myself had kind of found the town and come back in to buy some of these old houses. So things were starting to kind of foment with mixed feelings on everybody's part, about that. So, that's the background. I just wanted you to get the feel of what a surprise it is to, find this gem of a town center, and for a town that is kind of on the skids to have a gem of a town center. We really had something to start working with. So long story short, I had gone there to retire and work in fused glass, but I got hooked on these buildings and on the story of Ajo, and had some ideas because I had worked elsewhere around the country, kind of what could be done. And so the nonprofit was able, over a 15-year period to acquire almost all, except for the churches, to acquire the historic buildings in the town center. It was kind of an amazing process, and to save them. And then that was the kind of public tangible agenda. The quiet agenda was to develop a host of programming that would bring together the three cultures and the three nations, because they had been divided by a history of very painful segregation instigated by the mine. The mining companies in Arizona build towns that are three towns. So there was Indian Village, Mexican Town, and the Ajo Anglo town site. That's how Ajo was structured. And when we started this, nobody was talking about that history. People were sort of burying it. The new people coming especially didn't want to talk about it. So we just quietly developed programming to surface the memories and honor them and portray them in murals and have storytelling sessions and have lots of workshops where Native Americans got first crack at registering and Mexicans got second and Anglos came last. And we just tried to rebalance, to get a more equal playing field. And so, we're in the heart of the borderlands for that reason. And then we also developed a host of economic opportunity programs. We can talk about any of that you want to later, but that, that's kind of the picture of Ajo, and just try to remember like how weird it is to find this out in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. We're surrounded by quite literally millions of acres of Sonoran Desert. So we're like a kind of almost like you took a city neighborhood, because, there's a little bit of density in Ajo. The houses it's not like farmland. You took that and put it in the middle of the desert with public lands all around it in every direction. And it sounds to me like, both Eastport and Charleston are more towns like that too. So there's a similarity.
Tracy,
Thank you.
Tracy, thank you. Tracy is an example to us all for what it means to retire. She said she went to Ajo to retire, and she ended up creating a town. So with the help of others, as she will always say. But I'd like to turn this over to Ben, because I think he has the perfect segue now with his question to our esteemed panelists. Ben.
So Deb, thank you so much for that. And we're brought here under the auspice for a summit called Rural Women Everywhere. We're looking at rural resistance. And as we see rural make its way more and more into mainstream media and folks are talking about it, I think that we can agree that rural can mean a lot to a lot of different people, and you come from vastly different parts of the country. So I'm really curious to ask you what rural means to you and what it means to your community. So Laura, if you can take us down east, and we'll start with you to see what rural means in Eastport, Maine, and what it means to you.
What a great question. So I grew up in a hyper urban place, New York City. And I can tell you that that was not for me. I didn't really find myself until I moved to a rural community and really began to understand this whole concept of how the individual voice can have such an impact in small communities. Again, as I said earlier, with Eastport, it's that individual voice and the ability of people to know each other. Eastport's only 1,300 people. Washington County is only 30,000. Most of our communities are somewhere between 500 to 4,000. So each of those communities, when you think about them, we all know each other. Even if we don't speak to each other, we know each other. So I might be walking down the street and I see a gentleman that I've never spoken to and he's never spoken to me. But I know that he has won the struggle with substance use. And I am so grateful to him for having won that struggle. But I would never say a word to him about it. And he would never say a word to me about it. Someone else might know something about me that I would never say, but somehow we know these things about each other. And this is how rural communities are so rich, because we do have that knowledge about each other. Someone might need a wheelchair for the weekend. How are we going to find it? We're 2 hours away from the nearest supplier. It gets found. How are we going to develop a little pocket park in the downtown and a little vacant lot? No sweat. We know the local garden club. Well, did you know that so-and-so's aunt grows extra daylilies over in her town in Perry? Yes. This is the kind of networking that happens in a place like Eastport. We had a really great example about a month ago. A group, about 4 people, were contacted by a city councilor that there was a grant, a federal grant, that we should apply for. It was a holiday weekend and it was due on Monday. Everybody pulled together. They said, okay, we won't take our holiday weekend. We will work on it. We're going to divide up chores. I was the editor. We all worked on it, got it in on Monday. That's the sort of work that happens. People have this love of their community. They know each other. They know who to contact when a project is on the horizon, and they get it done. I don't know how it works in an urban environment. It's a very, very different kind of process. And that is what rural is to me.
Laura, thank you for that. Tracy, if we can head out west to you, I know you just gave us a vision of your town and walked us through it. Many of us who have not been there before, and you painted a beautiful picture with words there of it. Can you tell us what rural means to you and what it means to Ajo, Arizona?
Yeah, I would love to, but first I really appreciated Laura's answer. So I want to second all of that. I hadn't thought about it, but it's exactly, how it happens and how things get done when it seems like it would be impossible to get them done, But the first thing I thought about when I knew that question was coming is I just thought remote. that, I said we're kind of like a city neighborhood in some ways, put out in the middle of the desert. So we have that closeness that you find in neighborhoods, but more so because we are so isolated. The flip side of it, and it is the anger that people feel from being left behind, from being disconnected, from not getting their fair shake from the federal government. And so I don't want to get into politics, but it's not surprising that we've seen so much anger coming out of rural communities. Before I did this, I was working out of Washington, D.C., and I was working nationally and helping a lot of nonprofits all over the country. And the rural ones would really complain about how hard the funding was and how hard it was to find money. And I'm not proud of this, but I honestly thought it was sour grapes. I just thought, really, I don't think you're looking at it creatively enough or working hard enough. And, so, it was sort of instant karma that I became so rural because, and then took on, a project that required an immense amount of fundraising. Our first project was $9.6 million. It's like, oh my God. And yeah, it's true, that every federal agency has a different definition of rural. There are 4 different ones within USDA alone or HUD alone. And so, all of which impacts, your funding, and it's all, created by people in DC who haven't ever been out to these places and don't realize a county in Arizona, is equal to about 15 counties in Massachusetts or, somewhere else that has a lot of counties, so yeah, so that's the other thing, it's both these things. It's remote, it's peaceful, it's neighborly, it's a wonderful place, to live. But there are these downsides, and I really understand where some of this anger has come from that has fed into our elections.
And maybe that's something we can work to unpack in some of the other questions of, some of the perceptions, some of the feelings of being there. Tracy, I appreciate your perspective of having been outside of rural and then moved into rural to live that life. Joanna, I wanted to come to you to look at Appalachia, a place that you've been born and raised, and you've stayed making an impact in Charleston, West Virginia. So to you, what does rural mean? What does that mean to Charleston, the capital city of West Virginia and the largest city at 44,000? And you mentioned it's been a city looking at decline over the years, but still the largest in the state. What does rural mean to you? What does it mean to Charleston?
Yeah, that was an interesting question, I thought, when I knew it was coming. And I just want to echo what Laura and Tracy had said as well. About it, rural means to me, when I think of rural, I think of a remoteness. I think the homes are far away from each other. They're away from business centers and things like that. But then I go back to what Laura said and the closeness and the relationships. And that's, I think, what we have. Our city, it's a small city. It has some big city amenities, but it has a small town feel. And I love growing up here. I think it was a great place to grow up. And I'll say this about it, and this kind of echoes what Laura was saying. You walk down the street in Charleston, West Virginia, and you will see people that For instance, when Jim and Deb were in town for 5 days, I saw them at least 3 different places that I didn't expect to see them. I saw them at the ballpark. I saw them at a book signing, and I saw them in my drug court. That's just the way Charleston is. And maybe that's because there's not a lot to do, or maybe it's because people are drawn to the same things. I don't know, but I love that about Charleston. I love walking down the street and seeing somebody I haven't seen in 15 years. And I love knowing their name, and I love knowing their family. And that just echoes what Laura says. So I guess from my perspective, I don't see our city necessarily as being rural per se, but our state, I mean, definitely is. I mean, we've got population centers here, and I'm not being vulgar here, but this is the way West Virginia looks geographically. These are 2 panhandles. This is northern panhandle, and this is the eastern panhandle, and Charleston's right around here. And we have population centers in the state. In the Northern Panhandle, we have Wheeling. The Eastern Panhandle is like a bedroom community of DC now. In Charleston, had always been the focus as the capital city, but really the focus and the significance and the importance of our city, we don't like to think it is, but it's waning. And more influence and power is probably up in the Panhandle area, up in the Morgantown area. But our state is clearly rural. We've got rolling hills and we've got the Appalachian Mountains, as you said, and it separates so much of the population centers from the smaller pockets of the state. And in that sense, we are rural, and that landscape can be challenging because it's tough to get places. But as it relates to my town, it has this little big city feel to me. I've never lived in a big city, but I've been to big cities, and I like the big cities. But I like my hometown. I do, and I like its small town feel.
And as somebody born in West Virginia, I will vouch that Joanna's hand signal is not vulgar, but how folks from that state explain the geography of that state and where we are or where we come from that particular portion. Thank you, Joanna, for sharing that. I think the common thing heard is that despite rural being more remote, the communities are closer, that people are working together because in limited numbers, they have to, if they really want to accomplish some things. And I think a great way to move the conversation forward is I want to pitch it back to Deb, who wants to looking at some news you can use, because you all have helped move the needle in some way in your community in a host of issues, many of you wearing multiple hats along the way. And so Deb, I'm going to pitch back over to you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, panelists, for your comments. Yes, news you can use. That's a term we use in our family a lot. I'd like to pivot to this more practical sense after you've heard all of the stories. Not everyone is going to be like the women on this esteemed panel, be a judge, be a newspaper editor, be the community organizer, but everybody who lives in a town can see what's going on there, see what the problems are, pinpoint something that's important to them, and think, I'd like to do something about that. So from your perspectives, what would you suggest or offer to someone who says, I'd like to start working on fixing our schools or making our town more beautiful or getting a sense of community in our town? How does a person even start that? Are there steps to take? Is there something magic about what you do? What would you advise probably a younger person or maybe a retired person coming in, starting out? Joanna, I'm going to go back to you first on this question.
Sure. I do think there are probably steps. There are things that you need to do. You've got to set your goals and your objectives. And I don't think you can do it alone. I think that everybody's touched on that. I think that you've got to identify individuals who can help you and build a team and collaborate with those people. And I think with your goals in place, you've got to have some type of plan and set, whether it be in writing or not, you need to have a plan to how you're going to achieve those goals. And as you work toward them with your team, you need to be monitoring your plan. To the extent you need to pivot and change it, you can always do that. But I think it's important to obviously to have goals and to have a plan, and at the end to evaluate and to see where you're going and where you want to go from here, what you did right, what you did wrong. And if there's something else obviously that you and your team need to do, or if you need to build another team, you can do that. But those are the steps I think that would be critical to formulating some type of positive change in your community.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. We'll try to follow your steps. Laura, do you agree with that? Does that resonate with you? And do you have any examples of people in your town who've spotted something that they want to change and are going for it either that way or another way? Laura.
Yeah, there's so many good examples. And of course, being involved with a newspaper, you get to tell their stories all the time. One of them that took place about 10 years ago that I think is still very relevant today Eastport had a lot of empty housing, vacant housing at that time. We don't have that problem now, but we did then. Our broadband had just started to get good enough for telecommuters. So a group of people decided, well, let's see who are the telecommuters in this community. Let's approach the city council and see if they would be interested in supporting us if we created a website that was a telecommuter recruitment website. We would give it to the city. The city would then maintain it. The city said, yes, but we want to see it first before we actually take it on. So the first step was to identify telecommuters. They were identified, they were approached, they were asked, would you like to participate in an afternoon meeting? They said yes. They helped develop questions. Why did they move there? What attracted them to Eastport? Was it housing? Turned out that the affordable housing was the #1 issue. It was the peace, the quiet. What were the surprises they encountered? They were asked. What about education if they had children? They then helped create the website by suggesting exactly how things should be laid out. What would they want to be looking for? And then this group reached out to the Tides Institute, the Quaddy Tides, some professional photographers said, could we use your photographs for this website pro bono? We'll make sure to note you on there. The Tides Institute also donated some really great cultural history snippets to put on there. And then some donations were found by willing participants to fund a web designer. So it was done in about 2 months. So it was it actually turned out to be a very easy project when it was done in small little steps with a very clear goal, just as Joanna said. And it's still up and running. We no longer have any housing available for telecommuters, that's for sure. After the pandemic, everybody's moved to Eastport. But we have a vibrant telecommuter community now. So I would consider that a very successful way for people to look at projects. What's the need? Who are the people that you need to talk to? And how do you find a solution? The other thing that I think is really important for people to remember too, is that when you have a project, there are national groups out there, national models. People with lots of resources have probably already thought of your idea, and they've created models that you can replicate. So find someone who's a good researcher and who loves to find stuff, and they will find it for you, and then figure out how to use it and how to break it into little steps. And the nice thing about little steps is that you often have quick success, which builds your confidence in your group. And about halfway through, if you decide that the goal, through that process, that goal is not actually what you want, you found that your goal should be changing, it's much easier to pivot when you're taking lots of little steps than if you're trying to take one giant leap. And that's what I've seen with many of the stories that I report on, that it's the people who follow lots of little steps, have lots of little successes, that really end up building a very successful project with a lot of support behind them.
That is really valuable. I love hearing little steps. Look for models, like somebody's done this before or something like this before. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And take tiny bites out of the apple, which is certainly leaves you more open for success, I think, by the pivoting that you're able to do. Tracy, from what you've seen in Ajo and all the different projects that are going on, how does this fit into what you've observed, or would be the same or different or add to?
Yeah, I really liked what both Joanna and Laura said, and especially Laura, what you were just saying. I mean, I would add to that, and often do when I'm talking to people. It's, yeah, you need a plan and lots of steps, but don't get hung up on the logical order of things. Very often, things can't happen in the logical order. If you insist on what is the obvious logical order, it'll take 5 years, but you could do it in 2 years if you're willing to, you know, like spot the opportunity now and take things out of order and do what you can do and just keep your mind on the vision of the whole so that it can come together. I think what we did in Ajo would have taken, 3 decades if it had been done in logical order. As it was, it took maybe 1 decade, but yeah, so I was going to say, you've got to start with passion. It's what I think it goes together with what both Laura and Joanna were saying. But I would add, I think it's critical that you involve everyone who cares. And for us, that meant on these big projects, it meant taking care to involve those who could kill the project, who had the power in the town where their opposition could, if this is a big project, could do it in. So to really bring them in at the beginning and get them involved in, in the process really mattered. All this makes it take more time, but I think it's all about starting right, about really not excluding people, involving everybody who has an interest or stake in it, including those who might disagree with you, and working with that. And thinking of creative, there's lots of creative things you can do to, to diffuse the negativity. So, yeah, those are the things I would add to what was already said, not meaning to take away from any of that. So one more just cautionary thing. I think that we're all in a place now in our towns, especially since COVID, our towns are getting more attractive. And people are turning up who have a huge passion to change the town. I mean, I have seen, like, now we're noted as you are in Eastport as a town where creative placemaking, creative placekeeping has happened. And so there have been new people applying for jobs here whose passion is to make change. And like, before they move here and learn to honor the people who have lived their lives here and, what the place is that we're trying to keep, not change. And so, there's a lot of that around these days. And I think it's important that we kind of sift that out and know how to, help those people become involved, but tamp down that, impetus to change everything.
That is so interesting. I think what I'm hearing too is that you profit really well by having a big sense of generosity to bring in, to include the naysayers and include those who come running in and say, let me help you, or I can fix this. I think that takes a lot of generosity and a lot of sense of humility or being humble to proceed that way. Wow, this is great. Ben, I know you have a list of questions, and where do you want to take it from here?
Yes, so I do, and my first question is, when can I visit each one of these places? But we'll ask that off screen after this event, because I think other people might be thinking that as well that are on the call. Looking at the time, I want to be mindful to welcome our audience in with any questions first. I'll ask one, but if you have a question, those attending this breakout session, just raise your hand or go ahead and leave it in the chat function. We were seeing thumbs up to a lot of what you were each saying in terms of being able to give news you can use and things you can build on. While we're waiting for some audience questions to come in, if folks have them, one of the things that I'm always curious about is, how do you define success? And we talk about moving the needle. I said that word. I think that's a cliched phrase, but you've all seen success in some way or another. Just briefly to go around while we solicit audience questions, can you tell me your definition of success in, let's say, 6 words or less? What does it look like? Laura, can we start with you? What does success in Eastport, Maine look like, 6 words or less?
How about something like 100% voter turnout in the country?
Ooh.
I would second that.
Okay.
Tracy, what does success look like to you, 6 words or less?
This was tough, but I came up with talented young people choose to return.
I like that. And maybe we could add a parentheses, retired creative people look to return or go, because Tracy, you're a model for that, right? All right, Joanna, success, 6 words or less.
Giving youth hope and tools for the future.
I appreciate that. And folks, I appreciate if you have any questions, just reuse the hand raise function, or you can use the chat function. You all had different ways to get along your path to where you are now. Tracy, you retired, and clearly retirement did not fit you as you rebuilt a town. Laura, you married into the publishing business. Joanna, you went from a tall building lawyer to now a judge. When was there an aha moment that you knew that you were on the path you're on now toward community building and resilience? Joanna, can I start with you? The transition from tall building lawyer to making an impact in your town as a judge.
Well, it's, as I indicated at the outset, it was a path I always wanted to be on, and it was a long-term, kind of a lifetime goal, but it took me a while to get there. But it's kind of funny as it relates to my involvement as a juvenile drug court judge. That is not such a glamorous transition. I just got a call from a needy probation officer that said, we need somebody to take over our juvenile drug court. And I'll be honest with you. I think you said this, Tracy. Passion is so important, and she knew, and I am passionate about youth and families and the work that we do. I told you that at the outset, so I was all in. And it felt right really from the beginning. And we watched the program go, and we felt like grow, and we felt like it was moving in the right direction. And we're about 3.5 years in, and I still feel that way.
So thank you, Joanna. Tracy, to you, the aha moment when you retire to Ajo and suddenly you're involved in just about everything there and rebuilding the town. What was the aha moment, the spark for you?
I don't know that there really was one, but what happened was that I found myself in love with these historic buildings. And, I'd like to say that it started with really wanting to rebuild the cultural connections. But for me personally, I was just blown away by the buildings, and they were falling apart. And I knew they could be repurposed. I'd seen it happen elsewhere in the country. So I just couldn't let it go.
Tracy, thank you for that. Laura, to you, the aha moment. You married into the publishing business. When did you know that was something that you were going to be deeply involved in, and now writing a chubby newspaper twice a month and really producing something impressive for your region?
I love the word chubby. I've never really liked that word, but I love it now.
I took it from Deb. I loved when I heard her say it, and now forever I'm going to use that word.
I know, I did too. It was great. Journalism is in my family, but it was never something that I thought I would do. I've always loved to write. Writing has always been my first love, and painting my second love, but I never thought I would be able to make a living from it. So when I moved from historic preservation and working on esports downtown into the newspaper, it was more as a part-time job I was doing while I was earning a master's. I just did it because it was fun. It was great for me to learn the skills. And then all of a sudden, I realized that it was this connection with people, giving them a voice, hearing their stories, that I loved. I just loved it. So I think it was a gradual aha moment.
I appreciate that not all aha moments we can pin them down to an hour of a day, a minute of an hour, a second of an hour that we know that's happened. We've got 2 great audience questions coming in. I know we're short on time here. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think both are great. So I'm going to ask for some response on each. First, we're taking a look at the telecommuting newcomers, and this person's asking, noting that the telecommuting newcomers have raised the price of land and housing throughout the country. Is that affecting your areas? Tracy, can we go with you first?
Yeah, I guess it has. What's happened in Ajo is that as prices went up, as COVID buys started happening, especially people sold their rentals. And so I think telecommuting newcomers, some of them bought those homes. And so we have a big shortage in the rental market and the Airbnb market right now.
Thank you, Tracy. Laura, over to you. Are you seeing a market adjustment now with telecommuting newcomers headed to Eastport, Maine?
No, not with the telecommuters. The telecommuters who settled in Eastport were buying properties in the $50,000 range. And they often had families, and they were here because of the inexpensive way that they could change their lives for a really nice quality of life for their families. What has changed the dynamic are early retirees who are cashing out their properties in large cities and buying properties here. That is driving the prices up. They've doubled in a year and a half. That's going to put and is putting enormous pressure on the people who live and work here, not only for our taxation, because our real estate tax is based on a formula that punishes small coastal communities like this. So it's great to see the houses filled and being taken care of, but there's a real challenge ahead for working families.
Laura, thank you for that. And Joanna, I'm gonna sneak you in. Tracy, I'm coming right back to you after that.
As it relates to that, not with my work, I do know that our governor has tried to incentivize that and offering incentives for people to come to West Virginia. And we have some ways to go. We have poor infrastructure as it relates to broadband and the like and things like that. So to attract folks, we're going to need to do better. But it's out there, and hopefully we'll be getting more people in the area.
Joanna, thank you for that. Ascend West Virginia is a new program incentivizing people to head to West Virginia, but Charleston has its own relocation incentive that it's launched. Tracy, sorry I cut you off. I wanted to get Joanna in there. You've got your hand up. Reaction to what Laura was saying, reaction to what Joanna is saying, additional information from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a step back and say, I think Laura had it more right than what I said. I suspect in Ajo that is the more accurate picture too, that it's been the post-COVID come to rural safety, some early retirement, some folks still are telecommuting, but it's been a much bigger thing than just telecommuting.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, it's not a monolith right now, as there is a migration upon us, people looking at different parts of the country to be a part of, and they're looking at how they find the right community for them, which is our next question. How does one find a community that's a good fit for somebody who's looking to join one and be a part of creative placemaking? That comes from our audience. So looking at how somebody chooses where they go. Tracy, can I start with you?
Sure, come to our communities. Yeah, I mean, I think we'd all welcome you to come check out our towns. But I think you could also, there are resources to look at. You can look at the Art Place America website and see 10 years worth of creative placemaking projects. You can find those on other websites too. If you're interested in live work artist housing, you can look at Art Space America and look at their projects all over the country. Other people would have resources to mention. So I think you can find out kind of where stuff is happening and see what appeals to you. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of it going on so many places.
Tracy, thank you for that. Art Place America, that's a website folks can head to. You can also head to ourtownsfoundation.org to learn more about each one of these 3 towns and plenty of other places to check out. Joanna, for somebody looking to find a creative place quickly, as we're almost out of time, and I want to go to Laura next. Joanna, what advice?
I'll say really quickly, I would go watch that documentary that I can't even talk now. Deb and Jim put together. It made me proud to live in my town, because I think that you just highlighted the best things about it. It was the music, it was the art, it was entrepreneurship, and it was just people in a community trying to make it better. And I thank you for that. And I think I got a snippet of all of that from everybody's community when I watched that. And I walked away feeling like it was very impactful. So thank you. So if you haven't seen it, watch it, see it, get it.
Absolutely. Great recommendation, Joanna. I can't second that hard enough. Laura, to you, your recommendation before we close out this conversation.
Well, I have to say, first thing you should be looking for is whether the communities that you're interested in have newspapers. If they do, subscribe. You'll learn so much about whether or not you want to live there. Yeah. The second thing is to look on social media. thank you. Look to see if there are Facebook or other types of social media platforms. For instance, Eastport has an old history and photos of Eastport that's wonderful, gives you a sense of culture. There's a fans of the Quaddy Tides. You'll see some bickering, so you can get a sort of feeling for what that side of things are like in a prospective community. Look at Chamber of Commerce websites to see what kind of arts and business communities are there, as well as medical facilities, because these are all issues that you want to look at: medical, education, arts, court systems. How far away are things from you, and how close do you need them to be to you?
Excellent recommendations all around. Thank you, panel, for all of the information, the insightful stories, and sharing that all with us. And I want to thank Deborah Fallows for bringing us together, because we're here because of our towns. And I want to thank her. Thank you, Deb. And I want to pitch back to you to close us out of this program. We're so great to be here. And for those who attended, Deb, back over to you.
Thank you to my wonderful panel, and thank you to Ben for wrangling us, and thank you for the assembly for inviting us all here. You can tell how much fun Jim and I had on this project, meeting all these people and going to all these towns, and I certainly hope you go there. Just thank you everybody for this, and we would love to hear stories from you all who are have listened and participated. If you in the chat, I put ourtownsfoundation.org. And there's a place where you can write into us and tell us your own stories there. Some stories write themselves, right, Laura? Some movies make themselves. When you have the content, when you have the people, when you have the stories, it just happens. So I'm very grateful to all of you for spending this time with us, and we will see you all again soon.